Good evening. Thank you for that. And thank you for joining us on this beautiful evening. It's gorgeous outside, but it's also gorgeous inside in the library here. And I say that because I'm Library Director Scott Dimstra, very fortunate to be Library Director. I'm in Hennepin County Library. It's a fantastic library system, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Marianne Key Book Club. And we're going to welcome a fantastic author, Junauda Petrus, tonight. The Marianne Key Book Club uses reading as a catalyst for intercultural conversations around understanding and addressing past and current injustices that impact Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We begin tonight's program by reading the Hennepin County Land and Water Acknowledgement. Dakota Makoche Nane Okichiyaka, Dakota Land and Water Acknowledgement Statement. As part of our commitment to address unresolved legacy of genocide, dispossession, settler colonialism, Hennepin County acknowledges that the magnificent land and vibrant waterways from which our institutions benefit are located upon the cultural, spiritual, and indigenous homeland of the Dakota Oyate. The Dakota people originated at the confluence of the Minnesota Wakpa, Minnesota River, and the Wakpa, the Mississippi River. For millennia, the Dakota Oyate acknowledged and embraced the immeasurable expanse of our circular world known as Oche Maka, or Grandmother Earth. This beautiful terrestrial grandmother provided the Dakota with warm shelter when it was cold. She gave shade when it was hot. She fed them when they were hungry and gave them water when they were thirsty. She is still the first role model to all her grandchildren, the two-legged, the four-legged, those that fly, those that crawl, those that rise from the ground, and those that flow. Oche Maka unwaveringly remains a nurturing and compassionate matriarch to present and future generations. The Dakota people's wise growth and ever-evolving relationship with Oche Maka's guidance enabled them to flourish. Their lives were immersed in and inseparable from the unique powers and varying gifts inherent in all parts of the natural world. Their daily prayers to the totality of life always concluded with the declaration, Metaguye Oyase, another reverent acknowledgement of creation, meaning all my relatives. Furthermore, we recognize that a prominent term of endearment within Dakota society that is descriptive of the innumerable lakes and rivers within the Dakota homeland is the place Minnesota Makoche, or Land of Misty Waters. In this realm, the Dakota became a sovereign nation, a sovereignty that predates the sovereignty of the United States. This sovereignty status of the Dakota remains today. The four cohesive subdivisions of the Dakota Oyate responsible for the stewardship of this land are the Bade Watankatua, Village of the Sacred Lake, Sisituwa, Village of the Fish Scales, and Wapekute, Village of the Shooting Leaves, and Wapetuwa, Village of the Leaves. Hennepin County calls attention to the Dakota people's ongoing connection to this special place. Today, our cultural institutions continue to benefit from unfavorable treaties, military campaigns, and settler colonialism, which encouraged white newcomers to settle and colonize Native American territory. The county played a role in shaping the history of Dakota people. This was enabled by laws such as the Homestead Act of 1862, which brought 75,000 settlers to Minnesota in the first 3 years of its enactment, resulting in the displacement and starvation of Dakota people. Atop this, the heinous 1863 Dakota Removal Act coercively displaced and removed Dakota and Ho-Chunk people from Minnesota after a brutal incarceration at Fort Snelling. Therefore, Hennepin County acknowledges the capacity for today's county institutions to work more closely and reparatively with the Dakota people, whose homeland we occupy, the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk peoples, whose traditional homelands border the Dakota homeland in northern and southern Minnesota, and all First Nation people who currently live in or interact and associate with Hennepin County in a broader context. In creating transformative partnerships and alliances convening conversations to explore possibilities, creating increased engagement and consultation with the Native American community, organizing events and workshops on Indigenous history, culture, and contemporary issues, and looking at the potential for developing land and water-based projects together. These words that I shared are important, and I feel privileged to be able to say them on behalf of Hennepin County. But what is more important is that we convert those words into action. I call on you today, it's a simple ask. It's to please take a moment to learn about the history of the land, to learn about the people who lived here and cared for it, and throughout the colonialism history, but also those who still live here today. Learn about tribal sovereignty and what it means for our Native neighbors, and why this history is essential for us all, Natives and non-Native allies alike. Because you are all here, I know that you are curious and community-minded individuals. Your local library has book lists and resources to help you in your learning journey. Please consider browsing the library's website for a wealth of available information, and visit any library information desk to help getting started. Megwich Wapita, thank you. Thank you. The moment we've all been waiting for. Tonight's program will be a conversation between Myron Medcalf and Junauda Petrus, author of The Stars and the Blackness Between Them. There will be an opportunity for audience questions and book selling and signing at the end of the program. We also invite you to mingle and visit with the community partners who are tabling right outside Paulette Hall tonight. The Marianne Key Book Club is made possible with funding support from the Friends of the Hennepin County Library. We'd also like to thank our media partners, the Star Tribune. And for myself, I'd personally like to thank the library staff who have been involved in developing Marianne Key this year. They're all working here tonight, and they did so much leading up to this event. They're part of the Marianne Key Book Club planning team, and I'd love to take a moment to give them a round of applause as well. And I have to say, Marianne Key Book Club planning members who are here tonight, our community partners, and Myron Metcalf, you have done a phenomenal job with this year's choice. The Stars and the Blackness, thank you. The Stars and the Blackness Between Them is a powerful book, and it shows the power of books in our lives. For those of you who haven't read it, I'm going to share a brief clip, but it in no way gives away the story, so I'm not going to give you a spoiler. Early in the book, the character Mabel is reflecting on the recommendations that her dad gives her to read. And she says, I feel bad because I almost never read any of my dad's recommendations. They just always, and as a father, I cried a little during that. They just always seem like more education than recreation. I'd rather read my mom's science fiction or her Zane romance, low key. Well, I feel that Junauda has given us a book that does both. It educates us, but it's also recreational. It tells us a story of romance, of heartbreak, of sorrow, of identity, of joy, but it's also celestial and magical. And so it's this joining of education and recreation that makes me so enjoy this book, but it also makes me look forward to tonight's dialogue with Myron as well. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Myron Metcalf. Myron is the founder of the Marianne Key Book Club and valued partner of Hennepin County Library. He is currently a senior college basketball reporter and nationally syndicated radio host with ESPN. He also writes a semi-monthly column for the Star Tribune. Joining Myron in the conversation is the fantastic Junauda Petrus. Junauda is a creative activist, writer, playwright, and multidimensional performance artist who was born on Dakota land, West Indian descended, and African sourced. Her work centers around Black wildness, futurism, ancestral healing, sweetness, spectacle, and shimmer. Junauda is the author of The Stars and the Blackness Between Them, winner of the 2020 Coretta Scott King Honor Book Award. She is inspired by her parents and her ancestors who immigrated from the Caribbean, bringing their magic and their trauma with them. Her art ripples with their legacy. She is influenced by the Middle Passage and the diaspora, Black folks who in Minneapolis, ancestral magic, and the stories of queerness and womanhood within those contexts. Speculative fiction and magical realist elements are central to her work. So please join me in welcoming Myron Medcalf and the fantastic Junauda Petrus.
Hi.
Well, here we are. How's everybody doing? First off, thank you for coming out for another edition of the Marion Key Book Club. It's just amazing to see people gather in the Twin Cities and just supporting and participating. I think we're close to 4,000 members, which is just remarkable. So thank you all. We really appreciate the support. And give Junauda another round of applause. This is the star. This is the star of the show, and I'll try to stay out of the way. So my first thing, Junauda, is astrology is obviously a really big component in the book. I want to let you know I'm a Gemini.
Oh,
Okay, so
okay,
just,
good.
you know,
No, I
sometimes
love
people
Geminis.
judge. I'm just saying.
But Geminis have given us so much.
We have. You're right.
Geminis
We
have
We
given us so much.
We have. I just,
You know, Prince, our patron, you know, funky saint of Minneapolis, Lauryn Hill,
I mean,
Kendrick Lamar,
so many.
and Kanye, sorry.
Well, we are.
Can't have them all.
Well,
And I think
the
Donald
last
Trump.
one we don't
Donald
want to
Trump.
acknowledge, but
Sorry,
I
that's the
wanted
last time
to-
you'll hear that name in here.
I wanted to
But I love
that.
Geminis,
Okay,
honestly.
good.
There's some incredible ones.
Yeah, a lot of people have strong thoughts on Gemini, so I wanted
Yeah,
to get that.
no, I like that we
get
just
that
got it
out of the way.
way.
First off, the book's amazing. Like, first off, the writing is incredible, right?
Thank
I found myself just reading different phrases and being like, "This is dope." You know what I mean? Like, you had so many cool phrases. I think there was Queenie was speaking to a friend, and the friend said, "It looks like you're traveling inside of yourself." I believe at one point Mabel said she had been diagnosed with death. Like the song element. I mean, I know you called it like a poem to Minneapolis. How important was just the writing style in this book and the message that you wanted to convey?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I'm a poet in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm a poet laureate in Minneapolis.
You are the poet.
Yeah.
Hold on. You're not a
I wasn't
poet.
trying to humble brag, but I was
No.
like, let me just straight up
Come on.
brag.
You ain't a poet. You are the poet.
But yeah, but so much of my, like, you know, my emo teenness
Yeah.
was developed in my emo poetry as a teen.
Yeah.
And I really feel like also growing up in a household, like, you know, my mother's Trinidadian, my dad is Crucian. And so much of the way that they spoke was musical. And then going in to my general community. And I just feel like I always love people's turn of phrases. You know, like that to me is just... I love the poetry and language, the ways that was I talking? No, maybe I wasn't talking. I was talking, was reading somewhere this phrase about like a black people saying like, "Oh, I forgot about you."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just kind of
Yeah.
those little soft, but like, you know, these ways we connect with each other. So in writing the book, I wanted to like really live into the poetry of my Trinidadian family. Like I went to Trinidad for a couple weeks to do some research. I mean, I've gone there growing up, or not growing up, but as an adult, you know, I've gone to Trinidad. And of course was raised in a Trinidadian household. But I wanted it to feel like as much Trinidadian as I could for the characters that were Trinidadian. And because I felt, you know, when I was a young person and had stumbled upon a couple of writers who were Caribbean, and even like, you know, Black, you know, American writers like Zora Neale Hurston and, you know, Ntozake Shange, who really wanted in the literary space, and Alice Walker, so many, to validate the way we speak as, you know, valid in the written word. So I think that really is what makes writing fun for me is like, how do I really, and even with young people's language, like how do I acknowledge the way young people speak? So, yeah.
I really appreciate that. I mean, it's unlike any book I've ever read, but you know, as a writer, people always ask my influences, and I'm always like, yeah, a bunch of writers, but like Biggie Smalls also
Absolutely.
changed the way that I write.
Absolutely.
So I think that element of you know how young people talk just being injected into the writing, I think was really amazing. So I got to the end of the book, and I'm like, you could pick 10 different themes. If when someone asks like, what's the book about? There are so many different themes I think you could choose from. But I settled on a couple of them. And one I think is healing. And what's interesting to me is like, especially in our community, you hear so much about generational trauma, right? And this book, I think, introducing or sort of magnifying this concept of generational healing, right? Because there's so much healing that takes place throughout the book. Why was that such a central component of this book and this story?
I think it's the thing I contend with. I contend with how we will do that as a people, as a culture, as a community, as a world. Like I think there's so many ways we know how to harm ourselves, harm each other, get revenge, sort of enact and project our pain. And there's not very many opportunities or spaces to think about, well, how do we actually move into our healing and holding and connecting and feeling each other? And I think when I was young, I felt so hopeful and clear about how important, I don't know, maybe this is a trauma response. Like, I needed to heal everybody. I wanted to heal the world. I wanted, just like, I feel like I'm such a like lover girl in my deepest soul. Like, I really have always felt I could save the world, with my love, which is so wild. Maybe we all want to feel, maybe many of us feel that way, right? So I think in the book, a lot of it was inspired actually by this essential thought. Like the first time I ever knew this book was coming to me, I was like in the shower, which a lot of my ideas be like, bam, I'm a genius up in here.
Yep.
But like, I was like a story between a man on death row and a child with a serious illness, and how in our society, it was around the time that, Michael Brown and locally here, Jamar Clark, all of this stuff was happening, and how the minute somebody is murdered by police, they go on trial. Well, what did they do that made the police murder them? Yeah. Like, right? And like, they just aren't, guilty till proven innocent as a victim of violence, right? But when, say somebody were to die tragically, like, then all of a sudden, we could look at these, young Black men with a certain kind of empathy or sympathy or care or whatever, right? Yeah. So just kind of like being in America in a lot of ways can feel like this unpredictable terminal illness if you're Black, right? Like, or that it could feel that way at certain times, especially in this moment where there's just such a hyper awareness of protections being taken from the most vulnerable and hyper visible communities, right? So I think for me in this book, I guess it just started off in this existential question. It wasn't even a queer book initially. Initially, Mabel was a boy, character. Yeah, wow. I know, right? And then my mentor, Alexis Duval, was like, write you a gay book. You want to write you a gay book. And I was like, yeah.
That's a good mentor.
Yeah, so I think and then that started to click things around the relationship in Trinidad being a queer relationship and what that character story was. And then Audrey kind of really blossomed from there. And then Queenie showed up, and then Whitney Houston showed up. And I mean, I think, and I have, so you're not this nerdy in astrology, but my Mercury and Mars is in Gemini. So that's what makes me go, boom, boom, boom. Like, that's, I think why my art is the way it is. It's very experimental and eclectic and curious. And that's how the story novel experience for this book felt like. I was like, wow. Like Whitney Houston kept showing up, like literally in my life. I was like, oh, okay, that's right. You were queer. What was that about? Like what would it have been like if I would have known you were queer as a young person? Like that's where a lot of the Whitney kind of came in. So yeah.
I'm glad you used Whitney, because obviously Whitney is the greatest of all time.
If I want to just cry sometimes, which as a Cancer sun, I sometimes do. Yeah. I'll just go listen to some Whitney, some of her gospel, and just let me cry, man.
It's incredible. No, it's incredible. So how Audrey leaves home, she's forced from home after this relationship is discovered with this pastor's daughter. And I think I started the book and I had a certain perspective of her mother, right? I grew up in a church that wasn't very accepting of members of the LGBTQ community. There's a lot of us who grew up in the Black church who have had those experiences.
Any church.
Any church, true. But my experience in Black church, I had relatives who stayed away because of how they were judged, how they were viewed.
And I bet you they were the coolest of the family most
My
of the time.
favorite.
Yeah,
Some
it's
of my favorite
like
people.
y'all just because. Anyways, the cool.
Yeah, some of my
kids.
favorite people. So
Of
then,
course.
I sit there and I'm like, wow, I can relate to this. But then you go throughout the book and there's not a ton about her mother other than she catched her in this relationship. You got to go live with this father you don't really know. We don't hear a lot. And then towards the end of the book, we found out that she had her own challenges. And I think one of the themes is the weight of the world being on a Black woman's shoulders, right? So I wondered, wow, what did she have to carry? And I felt a level of sympathy. I think at the end for her mother, even though she had done this thing that felt so terrible by sending her daughter away. So, like, what should we think about Audrey's mother at the end of it?
Yeah, I think like that humans are complex, that humans are, that I think so much of me in writing the parents in the book wanted to speak to all of the ways that we show up and that we fail. Like, and also that we could learn, that we can grow, that sometimes there's blessings we can do. Like the act of sending your daughter away is perhaps one of the, it's a harsh thing. And it's a thing that I don't know if people be doing it these days, but I know in the 80s and 90s,
it happens.
people would just be like, all right, you over there,
Yeah.
And sometimes people were sent because it's like, I can't afford to take care of you. Actually, like there's a lot of reasons that people are like, I need, sometimes it's an act of banishment, sometimes it's an act of protection, And I think in certain ways, that was maybe an unconscious or who knows, maybe conscious aspect of her mother's choice is that like, I know that I can't handle it. And I also know that, like I think as far as what to think about Audrey's mom, like I think what I wanted to write was a variety of honesty and possibility with the situation. Because a part of me was like, all right, I didn't want that to be the only adult in her life, And then there's Queenie, who's like not only supportive and accepting, she's also queer in her own ways, right? Yeah. And I think it doesn't have to be this generational thing where everybody is linearly more, healed or grown. Like I think there's so many ways that you could be a great grandma, but maybe you weren't that great a mama. Or maybe you were a mom in a way that, like, I think particularly with the, immigrant experience, which, my family had, there's so many people who got sent up to the States or was left back in the islands because of the American dream and migration. And there's so many ways that like I remember having this realization about my parents. I was like, oh, my parents weren't raised really. Like they had, I mean, they were raised, I shouldn't say that. They weren't really raised by their parents. Their parents left the islands and they both were like super traumatized by being raised by whoever was left behind, So I think like that happens a lot. So, and this is the way that I guess I wrote about it in this moment. Like what would be the reasons that we would be separated from our parents for a given moment of time? And also who are the redeeming adults that sometimes we find in our lives,
Queenie obviously is sort of the godmother of this entire book. I when I read the book and started the book, there was definitely a part of me that was like, just let her stay with Queenie, like just let her get her grandbaby,
But
like
the hero's journey,
I know,
you gotta go up,
There's a part of me that's like, just
Dark night of
end
the
it right
soul.
here.
I'm kidding.
But she goes to Queenie and Queenie says she has to go, right? And she sees that in the stars cosmically. But then there's also Queenie who's had this journey of her own. It almost seemed like both of those components encouraged her to say, no, Audrey, this is your time. You have to go. Why was it so important for you to make Queenie such a central figure in this entire story?
Yeah, Queenie took over. I don't even think like part of it was, I like that. I like that about novels. I like that about art. Because like I said, it began really with the Afua character and Mabel's masculine, iteration before herself. and then it really became about Audrey and Mabel, and then Queenie, and then Queenie's life. So I think that's what's the beauty about novels, is you really can go interdimensionally. And I think even for me as a writer, I wasn't like, could be like, oh, from a, like I had to go in a very kind of cosmic journey with these characters. And I loved how, I just loved Queenie. She was so cool.
It's amazing.
And then all these chapters about her, I was like, oh, this happened to her. Oh, okay. This is beautiful that like there's this energetic ancestral love. I don't even know what happened when I wrote the book. Like, I do think that's, and I need to talk to more novelists and ask them about this, because I do think, yeah, novels are a place where you really can go into all of these spaces. It's different than other forms of creativity. There's even films, like there's ways that films are like, oh, you know, they have to kind of follow a certain way of being, but novels could be 800 pages, they can be 100 pages. It's like, but you can take people wherever. So I love that about what Queenie offered the book, was that she was able to kind of connect the dots, both in what Audrey was experiencing in her trauma, but also in this kind of queer, cosmic, existential, limitless, you know, element that these girls were all caught up in a way. So yeah, I don't know why the book, it just was like, okay, this is what it is. I'm writing this. Like sometimes I'll read parts of the book and I'll be like, I have no recollection of writing this. Like, and I don't know how, cause it's like, of course, it's like, but I remember I'd be crying. It was a lot of feelings writing the book. And I feel like when people tell me, they're like, girl, I was crying. I was like, I was crying writing it too.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
It's powerful. I mean, themes, you know, again, I got to the end of the book and I was just thinking so much like, what's the theme of this book? And another theme I think in this book is salvation, because I think Queenie saved Audrey, and, you know, Audrey saves Mabel and Afua. There's all these connected kind of components in the story. Did Audrey save Mabel, or does Mabel save Audrey? Does it matter? Like, how did you view that relationship in terms of how they healed one another?
Yeah, they definitely saved each other. And I think that's such a part of like, I don't know. I think that's why I like writing young adult space, because I think that's sort of a time where we're so earnestly wanting to save and love each other. Yeah, like I think when I was young, like my friendships were so meaningful and important to me. They were like my chosen family. Like within queer culture, it's like, oh, our chosen family. And I think adolescence is a time when we really have chosen family, like people who mean so much to us, who we care so much for, and who do that for us. So yeah, so I mean, even if the book wasn't like a sort of intimate sexual romance book, I still think the deep romance of their friendship was so soulful and important. I think particularly as a young person, I always loved stories. Well, I don't know, like I do feel like there's a way that, and I've been thinking about this so much lately, y'all, about how children and young people are an oppressed class, especially raising a kid, because I feel like there's so many ways I have to check myself and not taking dominion and authority over her sovereign spirit. Yeah. Like there's ways I'm here to like guide her and protect her and tell her things, and she ain't gonna run me. Okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily this thing where I'm like, yeah, my kid and I, we do anything. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm definitely the parent and the adult in this situation, but I don't see that as an inherently more spiritually important role. Like I remember so much of my childhood was like, you're disrespecting me? Who you think you're talking to? You know what I mean? I was kind of like this kind of, oh, this is the, and a lot of it, like as I get older, and even when I try to say some of that stuff, I'm like, I don't even say that to other adults. Why would I say that to a child? Yeah. You know, like why do I need to have her be afraid of me to obey me? And a lot of this stuff is like, just so that I emotionally am not uncomfortable. You know, like sometimes people yell at kids because kids are loud. Yeah, kids are loud. That's part of being a kid. And it's like sometimes you gotta be like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go in my room. I'm maybe gonna hit my little joint or something like that, and then come back and like we're friends, and it's now exciting, you know. But I mean, I don't recommend it. I mean, if it might work, but like you know,
I mean,
but I think part of it is like, what are the invitations kids give us to kind of not actually believe the hype of whatever this fucking reality is, you know? So I think, yeah, like I think even the relationship with the dads and the daughters was sort of like this mutual education that like initially I think so many ways Mabel saves the dad in the context of this grief, you know, and not that it's like this parentified thing, but part of it is like there is a wisdom she inherently has, just like there's a wisdom he inherently has. And I think so much of what I've been reflecting on, particularly as a young adult writer, is that like, how do I give young people the sovereignty and the intelligence and the wisdom that they have, and not, I think even this conversation with like all the banning of books and, you know, I have Toni Morrison on my hood, another banned book baddie, as I call us.
that's a good phrase. You should trademark that. That's good.
You said what?
You should trademark that. That's a
Yeah,
good phrase.
banned book
baddie.
baddies.
I like that. No.
But like, yeah, I think like there's so many ways that this moment of like, oh, we're protecting the kids. And it's like, no, y'all aren't. Like you're protecting your sense of reality, you know, that validates whatever powerful position you're carving out in this effed up world. You know, don't act like it's about young people. And I mean, so this is a banned book, you know, and there's nothing about this book that's more, there's nothing bad about this book. What's bad in this world is what's happening in this world, you know, that our total fascist takeover of our government by a racist billionaire raggedy. I've just been calling them raggedy. It's just, I can't, you know, it's just like you're raggedy, you know, but this is the takeover and this is America. This is what it is. And so the fact that they want to erase the history, but also the history is so good. We were so great. We want to make America great again, but we don't want to teach young people about the history of America because that might make them feel bad about themselves. You know what I'm saying? So I think in this moment, so much of, okay, I was talking about the salvation, you know? Like, I do think, yeah, like so much in this moment of being a young adult writer is being in this conversation of like, what are the conversations we're meant to have that are honest conversations for young people? And, you know, we vibing anyway. Yeah. So conversation, questions, whatever, we vibing.
No, that was.
Sometimes I feel like, did I answer the question?
No, you did.
I'm so far away in this field.
You did. No,
Where
you
am
did.
I?
No, you did. You did.
Okay, cool.
No, I appreciate it. No, I don't like prepare questions. I just talk. So
yeah, I love that about you.
Having a conversation. Another thing I loved was the diversity of spirituality. I think so many people think that, you know, especially within the Black diaspora, there's sort of a certain perspective on spirituality, and there's not. There's so many just, you know, levels and instruments. I remember my grandmother, whenever you get sick, she would have you pour like something in like a glass. I don't know what concoction it was, but it was like some headache concoction that she had created, you know, and I don't know where it came from, but I'm sure generation to generations it had been passed down. But I love the fact that this book emphasizes spirituality and that it can mean so many things to so many people, and there can be combinations of spirituality. I think, you know, Mabel talks about that and Audrey deals with that. Why was that such a driving force in this book to emphasize not just the value of spirituality, but that it can mean different things to different people and still have the same power?
Still have the same what?
The same power.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me as a young person, like my parents were of a generation of the Caribbean where it was like sort of the Rastafarian, Bob Marley kind of back to Africa. That was happening also in the United States.
Yeah, Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, but like definitely, you know, nature, Rastafarian dread, weed smoking dimension, but also very spiritual and spiritually seeking. I feel like both my parents, having been raised in very Christian, Catholic, Anglican experiences in the Caribbean, that was very, was it corporal punishment when they beat you or kill you?
beat you.
Okay,
but,
cool.
Yeah, it was worse for some. Yeah, but
Yeah,
beat
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what they experienced. So I think they were not into that. So by the time I grew up, I feel like they would reference Christianity, but also too they were spiritual seekers. And my grandmother and my family in Trinidad was very, I would say, more African inspired spiritual traditions. But it wasn't like a thing, like it was all still very much behind Christianity. But when I would talk to my grandma about some of the experiences she had back home, they were very like kind of astral traveling type things and different spiritual traditions that were definitely not Christian, even though she was very about Jesus, So I think, I also studied abroad in Brazil in college where there's so many ways that the African spirituality of candomblé and Lukumi and stuff like that, the ways that the African traditions were infused in these places was so beautiful. I think especially living in a society that's so, what Euro-Christian, Judeo-Christian or whatever, to be in places where you see these beautiful, rich, because these African traditions have so much, how would I describe it? They just have such a juicy, delicious, loving ancestral element to it that is so warm. So I feel like, over the years, like from being a young person, going to church for a year when I was 18 to be like, well, what is this about? Because I think I always liked the idea of church. Like I do like devotional practice, even though I wasn't raised in it. And then for a while I was studying with like, African consciousness communities, practice Buddhism in a lot of ways. So I think I've always been a spiritual seeker and I have my own, spiritual traditions based in ancestral, reverence and things like that. And so I was like, how, and I feel like I were asking these questions as a young person. Like I wasn't like in my 20s. Like I think from a young age, I was having spiritual curiosities. So I felt in the book, especially with what Mabel was going through, that was so largely existential, and even Afua's character, who's incarcerated at a young age, and knowing so many people who are incarcerated from very young and develop spiritual practices in that space. So I think just in the course of writing the book, the spirituality and this existential, like, what are we, as, spiritual and human and embodied beings, through space and time. Yeah.
I think another theme in the book, and we talked about this, is home, right? It's this.
Yeah.
I think Mabel tells Audrey, "You're my favorite feeling," right? And it's this idea of moving away from a place, but still finding home, not in a new place, but in new people, new feelings, new relationships, which I think is the most beautiful component of the book. Audrey and Mabel and just their love and finding home in one another. The Afua and Mabel and relationship there, I think that's such an important component. I mean, how did you see that? Because clearly there are people going through these transformational experiences. Mabel as a young person, which that was so hard to just imagine. I'm a father of 3 daughters, like a young person with this debilitating disease, and dealing with that, being away from her friends. Audrey, homesick, away from the people that obviously she loves, but yet in one another they find sort of this new world together. How would you describe their love? Because I think obviously that's a big theme in this book, and what it meant to the two of them as it developed and grew to the end of the book.
With Audrey and Mabel? I think that, like, as a lot of young people, I think at that age of adolescence, you're just thinking about yourself, your body, your desire. I think for me as a young person, I was very just tapped in and curious about my desire. But I also felt like, oh, I have to be a good girl, and I don't think there was any, like, all of the depictions of romance, weren't queer, weren't Black. And all of the messaging I was getting about what it was like, growing up in the 90s as a teen, was that I had to sort of present myself in a way to not be a hoochie mama and not to be a teen mom and not to be fast. Like there was just such a policing of Black feminine sexuality. And I think also too, such a sexualization of my body from a young age, actually. So I felt a lot of in the book, with these characters, I was like, how do I write, two Black girls figuring out, how to talk about their desire for each other? And also, how does desire and longing and care and romance live in a connection when, we're having our own crises, which I think is such a part of adolescence. Like there were so many ways that I was absorbing the crises of who was raising me and what was going on in the world, and my friends were my refuge, So I think to kind of create this romance where they could be their refuge and make out and be hot for each other and smoke joints and, talk about like, well, when you're an ancestor, if you become an ancestor, please don't do that. But like, if you do, like, you know what I mean? Like these things, I think, yeah, they are home to each other. And I love the people in the world that are my home. And I think, especially in this moment where the world doesn't feel safe,
No.
the world doesn't feel safe. And I think so many of us are having to remember who the people in this world are truly home. And it's not just people they post on social media, or, we think we're catching up with them because they're posting the highlights of their lives. But to really be like, yeah, like I was thinking this year, I was like, I want to know how each of my friends cook and taste like. Like, do y'all know how y'all friends cook and taste like? I'm sure a lot of us do, right? But like growing up, my mom was always cooking food and be like, oh, here's a plate, bring it by my friend's house. Or, her sister would come by, oh, what you cooking, Ingrid? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and I just think it's a thing, like we're all like door dashing, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But like, I think there's ways that I'm like, yeah, like when I want to make soups, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm putting aside soup for my girl or for my homies or whatever. So I think, in this book with Audrey and Mabel, so much of their relationship was cooking for each other and biking around Minneapolis. And I think about, like my mom's cousin was just in town from Trinidad. She'd never been to the States before, had never seen snow in her 50s. Wow. And was like, so every time it would snow, I'd be like, how's she liking the snow? How's the snow? But like my mom said, she just was eating strawberries. And like growing up, mangoes were like, oh my God, like I was always like feeding for a mango, right? In Minnesota. But like to be in the land of mangoes and wanting like blueberries and strawberries. Yeah. Anyway, so I felt like that was so much of the thing, is like, what are the ways they introduce their homelands to each other through this love too, and heal. And yeah, so I love writing the relationship.
You include, I think, 3 men who are pivotal to the book. And, I think as a father, I thought about just sort of their roles, both dads. I mean, both daughters are wondering what will our fathers think about us as we reveal kind of who we are. And I think maybe they're surprised by their reaction. And then Afua, who just is remarkable in that I think he talks to Mabel about death actually being life and how he had sort of transformed his mind. I think he said we die a few times, and just talked about past lives and future lives. And
I need to reread this book.
I read it and I listened to it. So
okay, cool.
But I just think they're such powerful characters. How did you envision, the men in this book and what role they played in Audrey and Mabel's development, growth that we saw in this book?
Yeah, I loved writing the dads in this book, and Afua, because I think so much of Afua is like the ways that I was politicized by Black incarcerated memoir as a young activist and as a teen. So reading Amumi Abu-Jamal's book, reading Malcolm X's book, reading Assata, reading Angela Davis, these people who are political activists who were targeted by their government, by our government. And for me, something about those memoir forms, because I think so much of the way we learn history is like this group of people attacked this group of people, and then, America, and it was just not that bad. Slavery, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it just is so abbreviated and flattened, and then, made seem inconsequential to, what we gained in the, end of it all. But I think like with these characters, I really got to delve into, like, what is the ways that I learned about spirituality through these people who were forced in these confined experiences? Like, what did I learn about America through these lenses? And I think, we live in a country where there's over 2 million people incarcerated. A lot of them are parents. A lot of them have been incarcerated from young for nonviolent crimes. A lot of them are incarcerated for things that people in other demographics wouldn't be incarcerated for as long. So those were the glimmerings for me to really have an analysis on the prison industrial complex and, the police state. And I felt also too, he is a human being. Like, he's not just a martyr, he's not just a symbol. And with the fathers, I think there's such a, I don't know, it was interesting. I was on a podcast maybe 2 years after this book came out, and this prominent, white lesbian community, I don't know if she's prominent, lesbians know her, I think, I don't know. But I remember she interviewed me with the book, because it was a book club for her, podcast, and she really was like befuddled at the fathers, the Black fathers. She's like, do you know men like this? And I was like, yeah. Like in her mind, and I realized it's like, oh, there's no real sort of working class father, Black father figures. Maybe there's, I don't watch all the TV that's out there, but I definitely was like, yeah, like, these are just good dads who aren't like, oh, look at me, I'm being a father. It's just like, these are just fathers. And I think they're not depicted. And I also wanted to show, again, like, what they got right and what they don't get right, but how do they show up to not getting things right? And how are they also, I don't know, just like human beings too. Like, I feel like I like showing them as partners, even in the context of Audrey's father's son, like how he didn't stay with Audrey's mom, but he still had compassion and understanding, and it was very hard, but it also was very, like, evolved in a way, and I think that a lot of, I felt that they were super crucial to being actually foundations of stability emotionally for their daughters, in their own ways. Like, I think Saquon, just his garden, it's like, this is this home for my family to just be, and it's what I love and what I take pride in. And there's a lot of gardening in my family. Like, my grandfather, my great-grandfather on my Trini side was a gardener for his work. So, and that's something I really found out after I wrote the book. So that's even the way, like, ancestors kind of show up, because Black Eden was just like, I loved it, and anyway, so yeah.
I love Black Eden. I grew up, my father had a garden, and he had grown up on a farm as a sharecropper, so he had learned a lot of these things, but he always loved gardening. I just thought the role of the men in this book was just so powerful. Like, this is a book I wish I would have had growing up, in my era, we didn't have books like this. And you think about sort of this toxic masculinity, that has affected so many men of my generation, and how much damage has come from that.
Take their podcast away.
So you take them all, turn off all the mics, right? But so much of it is not having access, not being encouraged to access material like this, to think about these different perspectives. So I just, I read the book and I was going, I wish I, in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, would have had this. For you, why did you write it?
This book or
This book.
I don't know. It wrote me in a way. I don't know. That's cheesy, but it's true.
No, that's dope.
Because I do think that's art. Like, art is a thing that, and maybe this is like kind of the paradigm shift that we're having right now, where, you know, America, put my bootstraps, and then I just ran and I built a building and I built a country and it's all by myself.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, just this whole mentality of individualism, which typically, obviously, never was done by yourself. It usually was through the forced and free labor of, you know, women and femmes and, you know, Black and brown and Asian and indigenous, all the things, right? All of the things. So I think for me, it was really fascinating how first the book started off actually as a screenplay. I was like, this is gonna be a screenplay. And then I tried to make like one short film, and I was like, this shit's expensive. And like, okay. And then Shannon Gibney, who's like a homie, who's a young adult writer, she had written this book. What was her first book? I think See No Evil or something like that. Anyway. And I was like, this is such a good book. And I was like, what if that story that was going to be a screenplay, because I even had written it a couple pages of a screenplay, was actually a book? And I started just working through these chapters. So I feel like now that the book's in the world, why I wrote it, I think it's for like everything you've shared, Myron, around like, you know, whether it's thinking about home and spirituality and refuge and, you know, I think like now I've been touring the book. The book has been around and out in the world going on 6 years. The conversations I have really are about giving people permission to be like sensuously in love and romantic and like just this juicy big way of being, caring for the people that you care about what ways that we are contemplating captivity, you know, different ways of captivity, whether it's through systems or our bodies or our mentalities. And definitely, how do we develop our own spiritual, you know, cosmology that is defined by what feels right in our hearts and our spirits? And not, I think we're living in a society where it's trying to take away all of the knowledge and access to knowledge and critical thinking and get people comfortable with being programmed and being like, yeah, program me, just make me an AI bot, like fucking put a chip in my head. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, y'all are dumb. Like, not y'all, obviously, you read books, you're in a book club. But like, when you look at, and I know I'm gonna call it that. Like, I'm not gonna talk to a Trumper and not think to the core of my core that they are dumb. And I'm not gonna stutter. I will sit with them. I want for them to have freedom and liberation and peace and good health insurance and not to be stolen from and lied to. You know, just like I don't want that for anybody. But nobody who voted for that man isn't dumb or deeply racist and fucked up to their, I wouldn't say their core, but deep, substantial layers of their existence. You know what I mean? And I think like this is the moment where we're like, you know, calling people in and also having people have to stand on like, okay, how has that worked for you? You know, how did that work for your ancestors? You know, like, I think there's so many ways that, like, talking about healing. So my next book, not to plug it because it's not around for about another year or so.
You should plug it.
But like, the next book is really about, I don't know, just kind of doing this deep sort of American existential healing of like this wound that everybody's like, oh, you know, they talk about the elephant in the room, like the wound in the room. That just is like kind of imagine like a volcano of a wound and it's geysering pus. And it's like, that's America, you know? And it's like, oh no, it's great. It's like, it's our, you know, fountain of youth. Get a mask, it's great. It's like, that's what's happening right now, you know? So I feel like this new young adult book, which banned my book, like, you know.
We didn't ban it.
Yeah, it's like, I still am a book club of the Hennepin County Library. But yeah, so I feel like that's my ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the banned book, that was a big part of, you know, why we wanted to select it, because I do think we have to fight back and say, these books ain't banned everywhere. You know, we're going to we'll support these books and put them center stage. We're going to go to the Q&A in a second, but I will say I didn't want to talk about the end because I don't know if everyone's read it, but the ending of this book is about as powerful of an ending as I've ever read in a novel. And that's like a whole nother talk. Y'all would have to come back tomorrow if we started talking about the ending. Instead, we will go to Rob. I believe it's our Q&A time. So if people have questions for Junauda, we have about 16-ish minutes for people if they
Please
like
just
to
raise
ask
your hand if
questions.
you have a
Yeah.
question.
Just raise your hand and they'll give you a microphone.
Well, thank you for this. Your book blindsided me because and I'm going to cry, my 16-year-old son died of cancer. Now I'm doing the spoiler, but he did not have the chance to experience romantic love. He was much loved. But anyway, that difference between a cure and healing. Can you comment on that? I mean, she was not cured.
Yeah, I don't know. The ending is always complicated. And I'm going to talk about it without trying to spoil
Oh, it's
it.
complicated.
Because
I
I
love
don't know that it ended. And I don't know where she's at. Like, I still wonder where Mabel is in certain ways, you know? And I think that's how I feel about everybody I know who's an ancestor. Because it's like I feel them all the time. And even like, I've been thinking about Mabel a lot, you know? Because I think in writing a book, you have to kind of be done to be like, okay, because you literally will hang out with them for the rest of your life. They become your family that you create a lot of drama for, as I say. I was like, all right, you're my friends, but I'm carrying all this chaos so I can read about it and write about it. But like, yeah, like I do think that there's so many ways that, like, before I figured out what the ending was going to be, however I wrote it, right? I was like, okay, there's one of two possible endings, but then there was another ending that showed up and another way to think about, well, okay. And it wasn't like I came up with it. I was like, oh, that's what happens? You know, okay, cool, whatever that means. I don't know what that means per se. But in the experience of the book, I wanted to give a lot of validation to young people who have terminal or serious illnesses, because that's what I was researching, because that wasn't my experience or an experience of anybody I know. But one of the things I remember reading was young people wanting to not just be given hope all the time, but also given a sense, well, if I do die, I want to think about that too. Yeah. You know, I've known people who've become ancestors at a young age, not through, you know, a terminal illness. And yeah, it's a thing that I do think, like, from a young age, like I said, I was so spiritually thinking, and I wanted to give Mabel context for that. And I also wanted there to be a sense of, like, I like what you said around the difference between healing and a cure, because I do think that's so much of even people who aren't young with serious illnesses and stuff like that. You know, like, I was doing research about all of these people who do these shroom trips, like these psychedelic trips, you know, who have terminal and serious illnesses, and how they're able to get out of the, like, fear of this embodied, you know, finite, you know, thing happening and live into this cosmic reality. So I think in a lot of ways with the book, like, I wanted to give Mabel this opportunity to kind of, I mean, I guess this dreamos were almost like her psychedelic trips that she was going into in and out. And psychedelics doesn't always need to be obviously through a substance. It could just be like, wow, these places that kind of dissolve whatever this artifice of existence is for us. So, yeah. Yeah, thank you for reading the book and sharing that. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. The book was, I haven't finished it, but I'm going to finish it. Yeah, the healing, how it's so much in the book, that healing in so many different layers it has felt like just mind-blowing, soul-blowing, many ways blowing to me, so thank you. My question is about, so I'm beginning my journey as a writer. I haven't had any, like, educational background in terms of writing or formally. And so what would you tell me when I, like, get stuck? and I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna continue that piece. And then I start a new one, and then the same story, and then I start a new one, and like I haven't finished some pieces, so I'm like, what do I do there when I get stuck?
Yeah, I think it's good to just keep everything you work on, because I think sometimes we circle back to things. And I think art and most creative practices aren't linear. It's not like some things you start right away and you finish right away. And I'm sure you might have examples of that, actually. And there might be things where you're like, oh, this might just be a longer piece, or this piece might develop into something else. Like I shared with this book, it didn't start off as a queer book. It really sort of grew into that space. I think having writing community, you know, people who you could cheer on, who you can be inspired by, and who can cheer you on, and who could read your work. I think also too, one thing I've been thinking about as a person that's been diagnosed with ADHD and neurodivergence, and I know everybody's like, oh, everybody's ADHD. Yeah, we are. This society's stressful, there's a lot going on, you know, whatever, right? But I think everybody's brain works differently, right? So there's sometimes I'll look at little things, like I notice, because I love long nails, the drama, right? But I noticed when I would type, it wouldn't be as comfortable, and then I just kind of subconsciously wasn't typing as much. So sometimes it's things like that I've been wondering with writers, or like, is the space you write in comfortable? Are you setting up a dynamic with you in your writing where you're being judgmental and critical? So then it feels like, oh, I'm going to that judgmental, critical space that I've created for myself. Or are you able to be like, oh, David Mira, who's another incredible writer, talks about whenever you have a writer's block, lower your standards. Which has been helpful for me, particularly with this novel I'm working on that's really big. I think sometimes I can be so focused on like, well, is that paragraph good? And then you get stuck on the paragraph, and then you can kind of get stuck at the paragraph. And then sometimes you got to be like, it could be good, it could be trash. I'm just going to write. You just kind of write. And then you kind of don't look at things for a while, and then you go back to it. So I would even look at some of the things you've put aside and be like, oh, well, what does it feel like today? You know, how would I write it today? What do I look at it differently? And I think don't beat yourself up when you take a pause on a project. You know, I don't think it has to be this thing. It's not like a child, like you're not raising a child anymore. It's just an abandoned project. You know what I mean? That might lead to something else. But I think that's how we're taught to feel. It's like, oh, I didn't finish that. It's like, yeah, it's not like, you know, you're a deadbeat parent to children, you know? So I think just being gentle and gracious with yourself, you know? Yeah, thank you.
Our next question's in the center of the auditorium here.
Thank you. Junauda, I loved your book so much. I listened to it first on audio and then read it also. And I felt like the prologue, when I first read it and heard it, I didn't really get it. So then I read the whole book, listened to the whole book, and then went back and read the prologue, and it was so powerful. And I felt like the sentence in the prologue, our bodies levitated by the stardust of the ancestors in our bones, was just like the foundation of the book, and that whole theme carried through. But I had a question about your first sentence, which is, we outsmarted oblivion 7 times in a row. And I wondered about the reference to 7.
7 is just my number. I'm the 7th child in my family of 11 kids. Shout out my little brother in the room. I won't point to him though. Yeah, I have 7 letters in my name. I'm born in the 7th month. But what's interesting, you reading this to me right now has me thinking about my new book, actually, which has kind of these themes of astral travel and lifetimes and movement. And I think what's interesting about writing, and I wonder about this for other writers, how it becomes like almost like this oracle, like the things you write and you go back and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And I think so much art is channeling. You're just like in this state. So yeah, what I love about having a book in this world is people will ask me questions about my book. And it's not like I'm an expert and here's the answer. Sometimes I'm like, wow, you stumped me. you know, which is good, you know, to feel like, oh, what is happening? Because even like with Mabel, like, you know, no spoilers, but I'm always thinking about, well, where is she exactly? You know what I mean? And I also think about where they are now. And I don't know, I was like, will they come back in my writing, you know, and other stories? So my mentor, Alexis Duval, she always calls characters spirits. And I'm glad she gave me that language because that's how it feels, where I'm like, wow, hi, what's up? You know? So yeah, thank you for that, yeah.
We're back down in front.
I just want to tell both of you, I've read your columns forever, and I always think, why aren't there more of them? Even when they're about sports, I don't even know the subject. They're great. But, and I've been to, you know, older, been to many, many, many book talks. This is the best one I have ever been at. Absolutely. No.
Just kidding.
I am just spellbound by you and your book. About halfway through, I said to him, this feels like a young adult book. I didn't really know it was. And then I thought, oh, I wish just what you said. I'd read this, you know, when I was younger. But hearing you speak, unbelievable. I just could listen to the two of you forever. That's all.
Yeah,
It's all Junauda. She's incredible.
thank you.
We'll just move a few rows back here.
Hi, first I just want to say thank you for setting this up so that my daughter and I could read this together.
Yay!
As a young adult and an adult experience, super special. So I didn't listen to audiobook, and just kind of selfishly, I would love to hear you read a little Queenie.
Oh.
If you could, or tell us a little bit about like that, you know, that Trini accent, and whose voice is that for you in your family or in your history? So
yeah.
I don't know. I just would love to hear how you talk Queenie. And if
Gosh,
you can't, that's
I'm just
okay.
like so shy in that
I'll
way.
listen to the audio book.
Yeah, the
No
audiobook,
pressure.
it goes hard. And also too, like, I like keep track of me because I'm working on some projects with my mom. And there's a lot, so she's the Trini accent, I really do base off a lot of stuff. Her and my Aunt Brenda are like my Queenies. And then Alexis Duval, who's not a Trinidadian at all, but that's my queer Black mentor, who's like my adoptive mom. Like, you know when you meet people and you're like, you're not my mama, but now you are. That's like how I feel about Alexis. So for me, I really feel like growing up, like, so my mom, she also comes from a big family, and she had her sisters. And what I used to love is on the weekends when they would cook, and like, you know, cooking Trini food, especially like the stews and stuff, are like an all-day thing. So the house is smelling good, the reggae is playing, the rum is pouring, they're talking shit, they're laughing. And I wanted to like have that energy, you know, kind of just that joy. Even with Audrey in her depression and being forced to move to Minneapolis, like having that energy of, you know, bringing that island warmth with her, you know, to that space. And then definitely Queenie is so much of that, like when she comes and whatever. Like I feel so shy right now, or else I would. But the audiobook is excellent for that. Like the actress Bonnie Turpin, who does Queenie, is like, I call her like the Angela Bassett of audiobooks.
She's great.
She's
Yeah,
amazing.
she's great.
And it was funny because when I first was, you know, my editor was like helping me pick out actors. I was like, I want a Trinidadian. I want a Trinidad. And he was like, no, you want Bonnie Turpin. Like Bonnie Turpin is amazing. And she goes amazing. Even my sister's like, because I do Mabel's voice in the audiobook. And she's like, my sister's like, Junauda, you're good. But who plays Queenie? Like, she's amazing.
Yeah, she's good.
So, yeah, like, I do think for me, like I was saying earlier, there's no way I could write the book with Trinidadians and not do some of those little, I don't know, like the Stupson and, you know, the energy and the laughter and the things like that. Even, yeah, so... Yeah, anyways, I love those characters, and they do remind me of like the women who raised me. And also too how, and this is the last time I'm gonna say about Queenie is that I also wanted to write an elder woman character who was fly, fierce, and unfuckwittable. Yeah. And just like, yes, I got my lovers, I got my weed, I got my grandchild, I got my Mercedes Benz. Like, I think there's these ways that, like, as women age in our culture and how it's depicted, it's like they're so bothered and they're so, like kind of these smaller, flattened versions of themselves. And that's not the women I know in my life who are kind of like in their 70s and 80s. And like sometimes they be putting me on to freaky shit that is happening. You know what I mean? So like I wanted Queenie to be well-rounded and in the future. Like I didn't want her to seem like, because in the case of the fathers and like, Mabel, for example, like the young people are having to educate the elders. But in this case, it's like Queenie is like the one, like in the future, like she's younger than even some of the kids younger than her, which is what I loved about her. So, yeah. And I'm glad that y'all read it together. That's dope.
We're in the back center of the
hey, no,
auditorium,
there you go. You popped
way
up.
up here. We
Sorry.
do have time for one final question. But before we do, just a reminder that the evening doesn't end now. Junauda will join us for a book signing at the far end of the bridge after this. Majors and Quinn, our wonderful local bookseller, is outside selling books if you need to purchase a copy to get it signed.
Buy a lot of books.
Buy a lot of books. And we also have wonderful organizations whose missions overlap with the themes brought up by the book, tabling outside. So please visit those organizations as well. And with that, it's time for our final question.
Hi, Junauda. I listened to your book. I'm going to read it next. I enjoyed it. I love the voices. I'm going to age myself by a reference I'm going to give you. The ending was so surprising and shocking, and the fact that there's a lot of spirituality in it, and I like that it wasn't focused on any one religion, but it was a big thing. At the end on the Ferris wheel, when they disappeared, it took me to that book, The Celestine Prophecy. Did you ever read that?
You know what? I think I started it because I think every home in the 90s had that book. So, but I want to read it again because I'm writing a book taking place in the 90s, so it feels like it might be
It
good
just
to return
felt
to.
like that when that entire civilization just disappeared in an instant. And it's also about that type of spirituality and psychology. And so I thought, wow, I need to go back and read that book now. It was written in 1993, James Redfield.
Oh, yeah,
the
that's right.
author. But I love the ending, even though it was like, that's it, that's all. I was disappointed at first, but I can see why. And now when you're talking about your second book, I think it's leading into that. So,
Yeah, I hope.
yeah. So thank you, I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Well, before we end, I will say what I always say at the end of these things, just thank everybody for participating. I've started a book club 4 years ago now, named after my great-great-great-grandmother who was enslaved in Georgia and Alabama in the 1840s, 1850s, purchased as a 14-year-old, separated from her family. And we're talking a lot with this book about ancestors, and I know Mary Ann Key's presence is here, whenever we gather, whenever we do another book. And, anytime we have these conversations, I'm reminded that Mary Ann Key is not enslaved. She's free because her impact remains. So thank you all for allowing me to extend my family's legacy with this book club. Thank you to Junauda.
Thank
the great
you, Myron.
Junauda. Buy all her books. Thank you.
Thanks, all of you. Thank you, libraries. Hennepin County Library raised me, so thank you all. It was a huge, this is a huge deal. So thank you all so much.
Hennepin County Library, friends of Hennepin County Library, Star Tribune, the planning team, they do all the work, and I'm so grateful to be a part of that partnership. Thank you all again.
Thank y'all.